The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 97. 7th September at Hogwarts. His handkerchief warmed at midnight with a message from Hermione not long after he'd laid down to go to bed. Ron is finally healed from his splinching. We're going to move campsites in the morning. We think moving around will be safer. Food is still a challenge, but we're going to be closer to muggles tomorrow. We'll try a grocery instead of my mushroom soup. Draco cast a muffliato around his bed before answering her. Have you ever tried fruit cocktail in a tin? There was a long moment before she answered him. I've had it, yes. I take it you have too. Yes, it's delicious. Okay. She seemed to not know what to say to this proclamation. Draco considered telling her about his evening with Ted and Tonks, just to move past the awkwardness of his confession about the tin fruit cocktail, but for the same reason that he hesitated to tell Ted about Weasley travelling with Potter and Hermione, he was a bit guarded about telling Hermione about them. Instead, he stuck to school topics. V has Professor McGonagall being shadowed by Mulciber. He's at least one sandwich short of a picnic, maybe two. You can tell Professor McGonagall is just riling him up by having him read and summarize theories, demonstrate techniques and such. Today he excused himself early. I think Professor Snape's right. He'll be gone very soon. Her reply came quickly. So, things are somewhat normal there. I was worried with Snape and whatever Death Eaters were installed there, it would be awful. Draco sighed. How much to tell her? That Amicus Carrow had brought in 2 little first-years, caught smuggling food from the Great Hall, and had zapped stinging hexes to the soles of their feet for it. That Alecto Carrow had been running her hands lewdly up boys' legs in her classroom. That Hagrid was enduring ridicule from Rabastan Lestrange at every turn during Care of Magical Creatures class. It was only the first week of school, and the year was already going rather pear-shaped. Instead, he wrote to her, It is as normal as we can hope for, I suppose. The food is still as good as ever. She answered back, Rub it in, why don't you? He smiled and replied back, I love you. Almost enough that I would eat your mushroom stew. No one can love me that much. But maybe just pretend to like it. Draco laughed quietly. I would do that for you, love. I love you too. Good night. Good night. Draco lay awake just long enough to muse to himself that, if given the chance, he'd trade places with Potter or the Weasel in a second, even if it meant eating nothing but Hermione's gross mushroom stew. Especially if she'd also nick a tin of fruit cocktail to share. They were to have partners chosen by Friday in ancient runes, but Draco still had not spoken to anyone about it. Having Hermione as a partner had spoiled him for any future partners, he grinned to himself. And what are you smiling about, ferret? An amused voice interrupted his daydreams of translation assignments past. Ginny Weasley was dropping her books at his small table. Imagining all the nefarious deeds you're going to get up to once you've got your NEWTs. You know they don't stand for Nefariously Evil Wizard Test, right, Red? He raised an eyebrow and smirked at her. Well, if they did, you'd be ready to take them today. The Weaselette smiled a bit sinisterly at him. You could probably sit for them too, Weaselette, Draco drawled, making a bit of space for her at the table. I'm not sure my sinuses have ever been the same after that time in Umbridge's office. Ginny hummed. Maybe you're right. I was hoping to pair with Luna in this class, but that Ravenclaw boy already got to her. You're all that's left. Well, you and Peter Faraday, but he makes Zacharias Smith look charming and noble, so... Ginny studied Peter again, appraisingly, cocking her head to the side as she pretended to look at him. Maybe I should go with Peter. Come on, Red. Live a little. Hermione didn't mind consorting with a snake once in a while. Too late, at her sudden, devious, delightful expression, he realized his slip of the tongue. Hermione, is it? The ginger's eyes slid sideways at him in glee. Interesting, you know. I heard a few whispers years ago in passing. Rumours of, consorting. No truth to those, though, right, Verret? A gentleman never kisses and tells. Draco smirked at her. Her mouth hung open slightly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Clearly she thought that the rumours were mostly a load of tosh. "Don't be shocked, Red. I'm devilishly handsome, after all." Draco gave her his most winsome smirk. "You're you, though," she said weakly. Draco dropped the smirking act. She never seemed to mind. Well, not too much, anyway. He sighed. "Hermione is a good person like that." "Too good for you, that's for sure," Ginny said sharply. "Well, you and I both agree on that, at least," Draco huffed out. "But for the record, none of my relatives told her she had skinny ankles like it was a bad thing." At this, Ginny's mouth opened in a comical O. She whispered, "She told you Auntie Muriel said that?" Draco laughed. Ginny joined in after a moment. That night in Hogsmeade, Draco waited nervously for Tonks, pretending to sip at a fire whiskey. He wanted to toss the whole thing back and order a second one, but he knew he needed to keep his wits about him in case this whole thing fell apart. He checked his watch. Only just now time for Tonks to arrive. Across the bar, a handful of snatchers were getting rowdier by the minute, and Draco wanted to get this done before they reached a tipping point from rowdy to dangerous. The flue roared to life, and a beautiful blonde witch stepped through. She was dressed in tight black trousers that emphasized the length of her legs, and a yellow sweater that hung off one shoulder, exposing her shoulder and the tops of her breasts. Merlin, who the hell was this? Draco thought. Then she spoke to him. "Watch her, Dray," she said quietly. Holy shit, this metamorph magus thing was at once both amazing and terrifying. He stood to move towards her, at the same time noticing a similar movement from the cohort of drunken snatchers. "Hello, lovely," the tall, snaggletooth snatcher drawled, hurrying swiftly to intercept Tonks before she reached Draco. Tonks made the tiniest of movements with her wand, hardly perceptible unless one was looking for it. A wooden stool jumped out silently from under the intervening table, floating stealthily just in front of the wizard, who went ass over tea kettle, much to the amusement of all his mates. Draco stood to offer Tonks his arm. The witch hurried to his side as though summoned there. She pecked him lightly on the cheek and smiled flirtatiously at him. "'Scuse me, Potts. I think the lady is looking for a little more action tonight than what she's going to find with you." The snatcher sneered at him. "Too bad she's here for me, then." Draco offered a more practiced sneer in return, and he and Tonks moved as one to the front door of the pub. Almost immediately upon exiting the Three Broomsticks, a loud, caterwauling klaxon alarm sounded, reverberating across the village. Draco and Tonks froze, momentarily panicked, and the entire group of snatchers for the Three Broomsticks was upon the two of them almost instantly. "Guess you didn't realize, Potts, but curfew went into effect at 8. Guess I'll be taking your witch after all, and you too, for good measure. Adam, here, he likes poncy-looking blokes. You'll do for him." The men all jeered and laughed as they closed in. Draco dragged his sleeve up his left arm, brandishing his dark mark at them. "Or, perhaps, you'd like for me to call you-know-who, and you can explain to them why you're bothering one of his men with your inane chatter. Or maybe I'll just crucio you myself. Cut out the middleman." Draco dropped his sleeve and raised his wand, pointing at the leader who had spoken to him. The men backed off instantly. "No, mate, it's all right. No need for involving any, other wizards, or any curses. We'll back off. We didn't realize you was, you." The men turned and hurried back into the pub. Once they were out of sight, Tonks and Draco set off at a brisk pace for the Shrieking Shack. "That was brilliant, Dray," Tonks murmured. "Glad this damn mark is finally useful for something," he muttered. They reached the shack and stepped over the threshold. When Tonks stepped into the lantern light, Draco was both relieved and slightly disappointed to see that her earlier appearance had reverted to her usual one. The three of them sat at the small table whilst Ted ate, and Tonks gave them an update on the goings-on in the outside world. "This Muggle-born registration committee nonsense is getting out of hand. Now, pretty much anyone who cannot show a wizarding family history going back at least 3 generations is being scrutinized," said Dora, sadly. "And how was the Order of the Phoenix?" Ted asked her between bites. "It's rough going. George and Fred Weasley have said they may need to close the shop soon. Diagon Alley is about the same as far as business, but they're getting snatchers coming through daily, terrorizing the customers, asking them where Harry is." Tonks sighed, sitting back in her chair and bumping the tabletop as she did so, nearly upending her cup of tea. "Remus has been trying, but he's having a tough time convincing any werewolves to join this side of the Order." Draco looked up. "Does Professor Lupin know a werewolf named Fenrir Greyback?" he asked curiously. "Yes, that's the werewolf that bit him when he was 4 years old," Tonks said sadly. Draco recoiled in horror. 4 years old? "Surely you knew that Fenrir has a proclivity for children," Tonks said in disgust. Draco rubbed his eyes as though hoping to rub the imagined images from his brain. Ted looked at him sympathetically. "Enough of this talk, Dora. How about teaching him a bit of defensive magic?" That night, Tonks taught Draco the redirection spell. It was a handy little spell that could redirect a thrown object, either turning it back on the assailant or sending it somewhere else entirely. It could also redirect spells if the spell was rather weak. After a couple of hours, Draco and Tonks walked back to the pub, the witch transformed into her earlier, sultry form. There was a brief caterwauling wail once again as they crossed the invisible perimeter around the village, but it was silenced almost instantly when Draco locked eyes with the Snatcher, who had parked himself and his cronies in front of the 3 broomsticks. "Just out for a nature hike, then?" one of the other Snatchers, possibly the Adam who liked blokes, piped in. He was shushed by the others. "I prefer the outdoors. Gets me in touch with my animalistic nature. And no one can hear her screams," Draco said with a cold sneer at Adam, who shrunk from Draco's arrogant and domineering gaze. They continued into the pub, Tonks covering her disbelieving chuckle with her black lacquered fingernails. "Same time Sunday night, then?" Draco asked quietly, casting Muffliato, even though no one else was around. "Yes, I'll come as someone different. I've got a feeling that this version of Draco doesn't sleep with the same girl 2 days in a row," Tonks laughed. Draco cocked an eyebrow at her knowingly, and kissed her cheek goodbye. And so passed the first few weeks of Draco's 7th year at Hogwarts. During class, he sat with Theo and Blaise, or very occasionally with Ginny, Luna, or Neville. The Slytherins had Quidditch practice a couple of times per week, and they were getting ready for their first match against Gryffindor later that year in November. Urquhart was finding Uni-WT level work to be more difficult than OWLs, particularly since Pansy had broken up with him for good the Christmas before. He had come to Draco, asking him to take back over as captain. One of the Slytherin chasers had not returned this year, so Draco asked Millie Bulstrode back onto the team, with the full understanding that he didn't want any of the drama with Greg from her previous year, with them together on the team. As Millie was now dating Zachariah Smith, and Gregory Goyle was old news for her, that was fine with her. The Gryffindor team looked quite different this year. Ginny, their star chaser, was captain. She brought back 2 former beaters from their Umbridge year, Jimmy Peakes and Jack Sloper. Angelina Johnson's little brother David took over as seeker, and a 4th-year girl named Sally Brandt was keeper. The 2 other chasers were Seamus Finnegan and a 5th-year girl named Ruth Fawley. Harper was scoping out the practices, and reported back that the Gryffindors were quite good, mainly owing to Weasley and David Johnson. Draco felt that old stirring of competition within, even amidst all the shite happening this year, both in the school and in the world in general. The familiarity and joy of Quidditch was always a comfort to him. "Happy birthday, Mai. I sent my gift with Thorn yesterday. Hopefully he was able to find you," He had sent her a rose-gold vinca flower charm, studded with tiny periwinkle-coloured tanzanite gemstones. It had reminded him of their 4th year, the year of the Yule Ball, the periwinkle dress, the vincas in her hair, and the year they had created the handkerchiefs, for which his password was the flower name. "He did find me. I was alone, keeping watch. He flew to the edge of the wards and just stood on the ground, maybe 10 feet in front of me. I don't think he could see me, but it was as though he could sense me." "He is pretty smart. Devilishly handsome, too," she answered. "Are you talking about yourself again?"
Draco smiled and wrote, "Oh, you meant Thorn. Yes, he's great as well."
"You're so silly. But I love the charm. It's beautiful. Such good memories."
"I can still picture you perfectly, with those flowers in your hair. I remember when you gave me one inside the handkerchief. Before then, I just wasn't sure. I thought maybe you liked me, but maybe I was imagining it."
"I admit it, I did. Even back then when I thought you were a prat who was trying to tattle on Hagrid about Norbert."
Draco shook his head to himself. He had no idea what he had done to deserve her attraction all those years ago, but he thanked the heavens for it. He had no idea where he would be, who he would be, without her. By the end of September, Draco was finding a few study groups that were surprisingly mixed by houses. More often than not, he and Theo and Blaise were joined by some combination of Ginny, Neville, Luna, Padma, Hannah, Susan, Ernie, Michael, Terry, and even Seamus, though Seamus gave Draco ugly and distrusting looks for nearly the entire time. By far the worst class for all of them was the mandatory Dark Arts class, with Amicus Carrow, closely followed by the Muggle Studies class with his sister. Draco had seen students tortured with the Cruciatus Curse in Dark Arts. Amicus was no longer bothering to call it Defense class. Alecto was spitting lies about Muggles, and openly advocating their torture when they encountered them in the Muggle world. She was also sexually grooming a handful of boys, and she seemed to have no qualms with touching them inappropriately during classes. Anyone who made a face of revulsion was immediately put on a list for her brother Amicus to use as demonstration subjects for a future class. Amicus was progressing to torturing any students that stepped out of line. Additionally, he was having students commit the torturing whenever possible. Vince and Greg, who had only excelled at eating meals for 6 previous years, were suddenly leading the class. They were both getting quite good at casting the Cruciatus Curse, and a handful of other students, mostly Slytherins, but a couple of Ravenclaws as well, had nearly mastered it as well. When Draco was called upon to perform the Cruciatus Curse, he made sure to speak in a low, sinister-sounding voice as he approached the person. It usually had them quaking before he'd even begun. He would draw close, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, an evil look upon his face. "Act like it hurts," he'd breathe out. Then he would say the incantation as the young student appeared to writhe in pain on the ground. If it did not look believable, no one pointed that out to Amicus. Soon, Draco noticed that some students would surreptitiously move closer to him in class, in hopes of drawing him as the caster. Still, he knew that Greg and Vince and several of the others weren't doing this. Most kids were actually receiving the Cruciatus, or just getting knocked around a bit, as thankfully even Amicus realized that no one could be cruciated that often without serious damage. Neville in particular would not keep his head down and toe the line. Before long he was walking around looking like he'd just come from a fight, nearly all the time. Bloody cuts, swollen lips, and bruises became a common look for him. Nor was he alone. Seamus, Ernie, Michael, Terry, and a handful of other boys were nearly as bad off. Madame Pomfrey healed most of these injuries quickly, but within a day or two they were often back, as another scuffle had broken out. As a bright spot, both Mulciber and Rabistan Lestrange had quit by early October. Several third-years reported that Mulciber simply got up and left when Professor McGonagall had asked him to transform a hedgehog into a pincushion. He was heard to be screaming, "I don't know what you want from me, woman!" down the corridor as he hurried to the apparition point. Lestrange's departure was far more quiet. He simply did not show up for class on the day that Hagrid promised to bring in an ashwinder. That evening, at dinner, Headmaster Snape drawled to the entirety of the school that, unfortunately, Mr. Lestrange would be taking an extended leave of absence, as he had other duties to perform elsewhere. Draco took Theo and Blaise down after dinner to Hagrid's hut, to ensure that the older wizard had heard the good news. Draco brought with him some of Pym's ginger rum, without the additional sleeping ingredient, of course. The four wizards toasted the news and sat down to a card game, in which Blaise and Hagrid took every hand. And Hermione was, well, she and the weasel were pottering about with Potter still. She still would not allow Draco to call creature, insisting that Potter would never agree to go back to the Black House, for fear of the Death Eaters gaining entry. Tent life was not very glamorous, though Hermione had had no disillusions going in about that. Weasley, it seemed, did not share that same sentiment with her. Apparently, in his mind, this hunt thing would only take a few weeks, and he would be back with his mummy and her home cooking by Christmas. Hermione, he could tell from her messages, was getting quite annoyed with Weasley, but she did not wish to rock the boat, she said. All she could do was stay positive. They had found this locket they were looking for. The other items would come. It seemed that one of them was some sort of cup. There was still no word from her as to the importance of the items, but Draco knew from their earlier discussions that they were vital to the Dark Lord's defeat. He just hoped they could find everything they needed out there. Chapter 98. Evasion and Escape. By the middle of October, Draco had settled into a bit of a routine regarding Tonks's arrival. He would enter the Three Broomsticks around 7:45 every third evening, take a lowball glass of fire whiskey over ice from Madame Rosmerta, and sit down to wait. If there were different snatchers loitering about the pub, he had to repeat his routine with them. However, after a few weeks word had gotten around that Draco Malfoy was meeting women in the pub, and to leave them alone if you knew what was best for you. To her credit, Tonks came up with more over-the-top disguises each time, and Draco was truly impressed with her creativity. So it was that one night he was waiting, at least 10 minutes past her usual arrival time. He was beginning to get worried. What if something had happened? He had no way of knowing, other than to contact Narcissa and hope that she could get in touch with her sister. He was thankful, at least, that the Snatchers were out either on the prowl or at another watering hole tonight. If he needed to talk to a coin, he'd rather not have an audience. Suddenly, the flue leapt to life, and he turned in time to see a beautiful red-haired woman come through, falling badly upon landing. As she sat up, Draco noticed her clutching at her stomach. "Rosmerta, a room, please," Draco called, rushing over to his cousin. The barmaid came out from the back, saw the witch doubled over in pain, and immediately gestured him to the stairs. "She can't climb those. Is there something down here?" Draco asked urgently. Without a word, the woman led him to a small, private parlour. Draco helped Tonks to the sofa, where he laid her down, pulling her feet up on one end. As she lay there, her form reverted to its usual self. In her pain, her magic was having trouble maintaining the metamorphosis. Draco did an in-depth diagnostic, the one Ted had shown him. It took a couple of tries because he was panicked, but Tonks's steady eyes, so much like his mother's, reassured him. The baby's heartbeat was erratic. Both Tonks and the baby had small injuries. Tonks's injuries were likely not severe, but the baby needed a healer, quickly. "I'm going to get your father," Draco said, squeezing her hand and standing up. "No, no, you can't. Your baby is possibly dying. I've got to. Ted would never forgive me if I didn't." Draco stood and spun on the spot, appearing in the front room of the shrieking shack a moment later. Where's Dora?" Ted asked quickly, wand in hand. "Get your healer bag. She and the baby are injured. Fell down the flue," Draco said quickly. Ted rushed to the corner of the room, grabbing up a black bag and moving towards Draco. "Shall we run back? Perhaps if I disillusion myself." "It won't matter. The caterwauling charm will go off whether we apparate or run, I think." Draco held out his arm, and without hesitating, Ted grabbed it. They twisted into the nothingness, reappearing in the small parlour just off the pub's main room. "Dad, you shouldn't have come," Tonks said, panting in pain. "Hush, Dora! My baby and my grandchild need me." He smiled down at her, opening his bag and casting an intricate diagnostic charm, even as the caterwauling wail broke out behind them in the street. "Oh my God, Dad, they're coming," Tonks whispered. "Not if I can help it," Madame Rosmerta said, exiting quickly. Draco could hear her directing the efforts of the snatchers up the stairs to search the myriad of guest rooms on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors. "It's all right, Dora. I'll have the two of you fixed up in no time, and then I will disapparate back to the shack. No harm done," Ted said in his most reassuring voice, although all three of them knew that once the caterwauling charm had been set off, anti-apparition wards would have been settled over the entire village. "Now, let's see about my—" At this, Ted turned to look at the diagnostic, hovering in the air above his daughter. "Oh, did you Remus already know?" Ted smiled down kindly at her, as though he had all the time in the world for her. "Yes, we found out at our healer's appointment yesterday." Tonks smiled up at her father through her tears. "Well, I can't wait to meet my grandson," Ted said, a bit choked up. He was pressing potion-soaked poultices onto Tonks' stomach, meanwhile performing a few spells non-verbally with his wand. "There," he said after a moment, "the little tyke is right as rain." Ted leaned down to kiss his daughter's forehead. "If I'm not there when he's born, please, give him a kiss for me, won't you, Dora?" "Of course, Dad. Yes." Tonks's voice broke, and she fought back a sob. "We're planning to name him Teddy, you know. Well, Edward." "I would be honoured, Dora, darling." And now the tears flowed freely down both father and daughter's faces. Draco's vision swam with his own unshed tears. Ted stood. There was stomping overhead as the snatchers moved from room to room quickly. "Get Dora back to that flue as soon as you can," Ted spoke firmly to Draco. "Why don't you go to the flue?" Draco suggested. "The detection charm went off. If they don't see someone, they'll tear every building in this town apart searching. No one will be safe. I'll evade them, or at least draw mouthwash to get her out of here." I will. Here, take this." Draco shuffled through his coin collection, bypassing the M, S, and B ones, and finding the one that said T. He had a feeling that Theo and Ted, had they met under different circumstances, would have been great friends. There was no time for Draco to make a whole new set of coins, and at least this way Ted would be able to have some contact with a friendly person on the outside. "I don't need money, son," Ted began, but Draco waved his hand impatiently. "It's a communication device. Hold it in both hands and speak. Short sentences. The message will go to my friend, Theo Knott. He is sympathetic to the order. He's not like his father." Draco reassured him at Ted's worried look. "If it becomes hot, you have a new message. If it's ice cold, your message was received." "Got it," Ted said quickly. "Listen, I'll make a cover story. You and Dora and Madame Rosmerta, you won't get rolled up for this." The barmaid grasped his arm in tearful thanks, offering her silent best wishes. She'd been taking quite a chance, helping them out these past several weeks. Ted turned back to Draco. "Take care of my daughter." He clapped a hand quickly onto Draco's shoulder, pulling him into a hug. Then he leaned down, kissed his daughter, and caressed her cheek one last time, before grabbing his bag and hurrying out the parlour door. 10 seconds later there was a clamour upon the staircase. Draco peeked out of the crack of the door to see 7 snatchers hurrying across the pub, heading out the front door towards Ted. The one in the lead was less than 15 feet behind the man. "We've got to go and help him," Tonks said weakly. Draco was inclined to agree. He held his wand tight and made as if to open the door, but was stopped by a hand on his shoulder. Madame Rosmerta pulled him away from the door with a stern look upon her face. "You weren't able to kill last year, child. What makes you think this will be different?" Draco stared at her in disbelief. Although she had no memory of their interaction from last year, apparently Word had gotten back to her about what had happened at the top of the astronomy tower. "If I don't kill them, they might kill Ted," Draco said fervently. "They want him alive. There's a reward out for him," the barmaid said simply. "If he arrives at the ministry, beaten and half dead, there's a chance they might not get the full reward. But if he goes calmly, they'll take him in without hurting him." "I hope you're right," Draco huffed. "Tonks, we need to get you out of here whilst they're distracted." He helped her to her feet, and he and Rosmerta helped her to the parlour door, and across the pub to the flue. "Is Remus home to take care of you?" Draco asked quietly. "Yes, there's a full 3 weeks until the next moon phase, and he has his potion. I'll be fine." Tonks smiled kindly up at him, hugging him around his neck. With a pinch of powder and a flash of green, she was gone. "You should get back to the castle," Madame Rosmerta said quickly. "There's been so much caterwauling tonight. Maybe they won't notice one more." Draco nodded, but he knew it would not matter. For weeks he had been able to walk in the village without the caterwaul. It was due to the dark mark, he knew. Back in his room that night, he briefly told Theo what he had done with the coin. Theo immediately sent a message to Ted, asking if he was okay, and offering any help he could. He told Draco he would let Draco know if he got a response. Draco sent a message to Narcissa saying that Ted had been captured. She asked if Ted had brought the mirror hanging on the wall in the shack. Draco racked his brain but did not recall Ted taking anything off the wall, only that he grabbed his healer's bag. "It was a two-way mirror. He and Andry talked through it." "I didn't realize. He has a coin like this one. I can relay messages from him to you. You can send to Andry." "Yes, that's good." "I'm sorry it happened. Maybe if I'd caught Tonks before she fell—" "You did all you could, and you saved the baby. Ted would have died to save his grandchild." As Draco fell asleep that night, a disturbing thought wouldn't leave his mind. There was a strong possibility that Ted Tonks might still die, all because he loved his child and grandchild. 2 mornings later, Draco awoke to the good news from Theo that Ted had escaped the Snatchers. He'd been able to steal one of their wands, and had disapparated to the countryside. There he'd struck up a deal with a farmer in the mundane world to paint the man's barn in exchange for food and shelter in the barn. Draco hoped that he would be all right. It was one thing to sleep in a barn in October, but quite another in December or January. Though Theo did not share everything about what was said by Ted, he got the sense that he and Ted got along thick as thieves. It was not unusual in the evenings to see Theo on his bed, covertly holding the coin and speaking with the muffliato in place, or reading its edge. He got away with it by telling Bacon and Eggs that it was a magical coin that could predict the past. He then proceeded to astound them by accurately predicting the outcomes of historical events that had already happened. It was all that Draco and Blaise could do not to laugh openly. It was a Thursday, the day before Halloween. The idea of the holiday put Draco a bit on edge, if he was being honest with himself. The Carrows were an unpleasant pair, to put it lightly, and he had no idea what kind of wickedness the holiday would bring out in them. As it turned out, it wasn't the Carrows he should have been watching out for. It was Ginny Weasley. "We need your help," she announced as she flopped into the chair next to Draco in the library, after casting an impressive, non-verbal silencing charm. Draco exhaled heavily. "Who is we, and what kind of help?" The witch wasted no time in explaining. "If you know about Hermione's skinny ankles, I'm assuming she also told you what happened the day before, with Rufus Scrimgeour." He read the will of, "Yeah, that guy you tried to kill." Ginny looked at him with a sharply raised eyebrow, and Draco had the temerity to look shamefaced. "Right, she got a children's book. So what? You need my literary analysis of it?" It was Ginny's turn to huff, annoyed. "No, twat! We need the sword. Well, Harry does." The sword of Gryffindor. Despite knowing that the silencing charm was strong, Draco's voice still dropped to a whisper. "What the hell are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to do everything I can to keep it out of Snape's hands," the ginger witch hissed, and Draco had a very clear picture of what Potter found so attractive about the witch. When she was fired up, she was fired up. It rather reminded him of his own witch. "Snape isn't—" but he stopped himself. As far as Potter and the Weasleys and most of the wizarding world was concerned, Snape was enemy number one. It did not matter what he said here. In fact, if he defended Snape, it was more likely that he himself would be assumed in league with Snape, regardless of who he loved. He started again. "Snape isn't going to let it go without a fight. But fine. So you want to get the sword, and somehow, some way, you're going to get it to Harry Potter while he's camped out in the woods." "Harry is camped out in the woods?" Ginny asked excitedly. "Are they okay?" "So far, they're fine. You know they're looking for things, right?" "No. I had no idea." And at this, the red-haired witch's face fell a bit. Apparently, Potter had not trusted her with this information. "I don't know what the things are, or what they do, or why they're important, or where they're looking for them, or anything else," he said quickly in reassurance. "I'm sure he's just trying to protect you." Ginny appeared to consider this stoically, and then nod. "So, the sword. Any idea how we can go about nicking it?" Just kidding. We have a plan." And with that, Ginny outlined their plan to him. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.